Hi, this is Matt Kohlberg, Application Specialist at Cancel. Today we're going to talk about dimensioning. We'll talk about commands used to get dimensions into the drawing. We'll discuss commands to edit those dimensions once they're inside the drawing. Then we'll discuss the dimension style, which affects how those dimensions look. Let's first discuss how to get dimensions into the drawing. By far the quickest method to dimension a single object, in this case a polyline, is to use the quick dimension option. I'll select the object, I'll drag up or down for horizontal dimension, I'll drag left or right for a vertical dimension. Quick and easy. Next is just the dimension command, or the dim command. Remember, this is a polyline, but this command will dimension individual segments of it. In this case, the software knows if it's a horizontal or vertical dimension, or even if it's an aligned dimension. But it depends on where I place my cursor as I'm dragging. If I place my cursor this way, it treats it as a horizontal dimension. If I move it this way, it treats it as a vertical dimension. I'll add an aligned dimension. Next, you can choose one of the dedicated dimensioning tools. Definitely a linear, definitely aligned, angular for dimensioning angles, arc length, radius, diameter, jogged, and finally ordinate. Next, I'm going to discuss a continuation and baseline dimensions. All right, we have an existing dimension here. I'd like to continue on and measure to these other two corners. So I can use this tool for continue, or I can use the multifunction grip. I'd like to continue from here, so I hover on that grip and I'll choose Continue Dimension. Pick that endpoint, pick this endpoint. Hit Enter. Next is Baseline Dimension. I'd like to measure all the corners starting from this corner. So I'll select the starting dimension. I'll use the multifunction grip and I'll choose Baseline. I'll dimension to here, I'll dimension to there. And that's a baseline dimension. One more type of dimension that's worth noting is the ordinate dimension. It's set up to dimension any particular corner of your model from one central place. For example, the bottom left corner of this shape I can say is 0, 0, 0x, 0y. And so each other corner can have a value relative to that. I'll launch the ordinate dimensioning tool, pick the bottom corner. As you can tell, it's not 0. That's 23 feet in the y dimension, and this is 85 feet in the x dimension. I would like that to be 0, 0. So first we need to set the origin, and that's done through the UCS command. UCS, O for origin. Where is 0, 0? I'll pick that spot right there. So that's our new origin. Now when I use the ordinate tool, it's giving me dimensions all relative to 0, 0. Now I'll do in the x dimension. And that's how the ordinate tool works. It's considered bad drafting practice to have a dimension extension line pass through another dimension's dimension line. Like this, we have an intersection. There should be a gap there. To combat this, AutoCAD has a dim break command. We choose the dimension we'd like to break. And that's it. there's now a dynamic gap. If I choose to move this dimension, that gap will also move. AutoCAD dimensions are dynamic with the geometry they dimension. So as I make changes to this polyline, that 1 foot 3 dimension will update itself. Now I no longer need it to be dragged off like that, so I can use my multifunction grip and reset text position. Maybe I'd like it to show up above the dimension line, like that. Sometimes with dimensions, it's important to be able to add other text in addition to the basic dimension. Just by double-clicking the text, I'll move my cursor to the end and I can type minimum. If I need to go to the next line, I just hit enter. Maybe I'd like the word tip to be below the the dimension line. I have to do this in a specific manner. So I'll continue by editing the text. I'll get rid of that new line. And I'll type backslash and the large X. And that puts the main dimension on top, and after a enter, it puts the rest underneath. You can use multifunction grip functionality to modify your dimensions in meaningful ways. For example, I'd like to take all these dimensions and slide them up the page. If I hover on this grip, I have an option to stretch that one dimension, or in fact stretch the entire group. If I hover again, I can continue the dimension. I can use the baseline like we've said. If I hover around the grip on the text, I get different text-based options. Let's take a look at this one. Now, given the size of this dimension, I know that those arrows can fit between the extension lines, and that's the way I prefer it to look. So I can hover and choose flip the arrow, and I can flip this one as well. Alright, now maybe the text is in an undesirable place, so I can hover on that grip and choose move the text and add a leader. Okay, so all that from multifunction grip functionality. Next, let's discuss why dimensions look the way they do. Because it's a conglomerate object, it's not a text, arrows, lines, etc. It's one dimension object, right? And the way it looks is because of a defined dimension style. Now this one is using a style called standard. So let's take a look at it. There's standard. We have settings for dimension lines, extension lines, arrowheads, settings for text, settings for fit, units, even alternate units. And I'm going to split my screen in half here. Okay, it's the same geometry, the same dimensions, except the dimension styles are different. The dimensions on the left are using a style named S2. Dimensions on the right are using a style named standard. Take a look at this vertical dimension right here, 4 feet 9 inches. The text is horizontal. On the left, it's vertical in line with my dimension line. Another difference, which may not be quite so obvious, is this extension right here. It goes past my arrowhead by a certain amount. On the left, it doesn't go past quite so far. In fact, the arrowhead isn't an arrowhead on the left, it's an oblique angle. So that's how dimensions look the way they do. you'll find that very often your text, your arrowheads, the way your dimensions look will be either too small or too large relative to the geometry they're dimensioning. Right now everything seems okay. But if your model is, in this case, 5 times bigger, the text is a little small. I'd like the text a little bigger. Now what you don't have to do is you don't have to create a whole new dimension style just for a different scale. Right? So within this dimension style, there's an option under the Fit tab that specifies a scale. Right? So you specify your text, in this case 1/8 of an inch. You specify all your values at normal printed values. Then depending on the scale that you're working with, you adjust this number. Now if I change that number now, it's not going to change any existing dimensions. So what I'll do is I'll grab the dimensions, I'll deselect my geometry so that I just have dimensions selected. Then I can use the Properties palette to change the scale. Right here it's set to 30. Now I know this is 5 times larger, so I'm going to set this to 150. And everything looks fantastic now. Right, so these are much smaller than these, but relative to the geometry they're dimensioning, they look great. That's your dim scale variable. Here are examples of some of the different dimension types you can add. This is linear, or AutoCAD refers to it as rotated. This is an aligned dimension. This is angular, measures the angles. Arc length. Diametric, measures the diameter. Jogged, when there's not enough room to label the entire radius. Ordinate. And finally radial, measures the radius. Lastly, these images indicate which boxes in the dimension style dialog box pertain to which pieces of the actual dimension. This is the lines section of the dim style. Symbols and arrows. Text. Primary units. And finally, alternate units. Thanks very much. This has been your dimension tutorial.